The snow had started falling again. Soft at first, then harder. The searchlights had gone dark. The helicopters, grounded. 48 hours of searching, shouting her name, and now, nothing. Silence. The parents stood by the edge of the forest, shoulders heavy, eyes swollen, lips trembling but wordless. They had screamed, pleaded, cried into the trees. Not that they just stood there, empty. Behind them, the last rescue team packed up their gear. Too dangerous to keep going, one of them said quietly. Another added, she wouldn't survive another night out there. They didn't say it to the parents, but everyone knew what they meant, and in that silence came a sharp, desperate howl. Ranger, the family's 5-year-old golden retriever. He wasn't trained for this. He was just a farm dog, loyal, playful, with a nose that never stopped sniffing and a heart that never stopped loving. Now, that heart was pounding, that nose pressed deep into the frozen ground. He circled, barked, then dug madly through a snowbank. Nobody looked. Nobody believed. But Ranger didn't care. His girl was still out there. He paced along the tree line, whimpering, sniffing, tail stiff with tension. Then suddenly, he stopped. A scent. Faint. Buried. But it was hers. Without a sound, he darted into the woods. Snow clung to his fur, wind lashed at his eyes, but Ranger ran. Past fallen branches. Over icy creeks. Deeper, deeper, into the cold, endless dark. Hours passed. A bark. Urgent. Then another. He was digging at something. Scratching wildly at a snow-covered hollow between the roots of an old pine tree. And inside, a tiny sound. A whimper. Faint, but alive. The little girl was curled inside the hollow, her lips blue, eyes half closed. She hadn't cried in hours. Her voice had gone weak. But when she felt the warmth of Ranger's fur, she moved. He licked her face, curled beside her, and barked again, louder this time. Over and over. Miles away, a rescuer paused. Did you hear that? And then they ran. They searched for 48 hours. They called her name and got silence. They said it was over. They said she was gone. But Ranger didn't listen. He never stopped sniffing. And that's why she's still alive. The soft hum of morning stirred across the family's small countryside farm. Chickens rustled in their coop, dew glistened on the grass, and the faint sound of a bell on a dog collar jingled through the open barn doors. Ranger, a 5-year-old golden retriever with a thick golden coat and deep, intelligent eyes, bounded happily across the yard. He wasn't a search dog, or even a trained hero. He was a farm dog. Loyal, smart, playful, and completely devoted to one person, Emily. Emily, just 6 years old, was his human, his shadow, his partner in every game, his whole world. She ran barefoot through the damp grass, a blanket of curls bouncing as she giggled, "Ranger, come find me." Without hesitation, Ranger turned in a circle, nose to the ground. His tail wagged like crazy as he sniffed, not because he didn't know where she was, but because he loved the chase. She was behind the haystack again. Just like yesterday. He pounced around the corner and let out a playful bark. Emily squealed, "You always find me." He gently nudged her with his nose, then licked her cheek, sending her into another round of giggles. This was their ritual, hide and seek, farm style. No matter where she went, Ranger would sniff and seek until he found her. From the kitchen window, her mother watched with a warm smile. "They're inseparable," she said to her husband as he sipped coffee. That dog would follow her to the ends of the earth. On the porch, Emily curled into Ranger's side as he lay in the sun. She traced patterns in his fur and whispered, "You're the best dog in the world." Ranger thumped his tail gently in agreement. Later that day, Emily's mother called her inside for lunch. "Just 5 more minutes," she pleaded. "All right," her mother agreed, "but stay near the barn." Emily looked at Ranger seriously. "Okay, new rule," she said. "If I ever really get lost, you'll find me, right?" Ranger tilted his head, ears perking up. He didn't understand all the words, but he felt the emotion, the sincerity. And in the way dogs do, he gave her his silent promise, "I will." That night, As the stars blinked into view, Emily's father was putting away tools when he spotted something peculiar. Ranger had wandered to the edge of the woods and was sniffing around in the dark. Not just sniffing, searching. "Hey boy, come back here," he called. Ranger paused, then trotted back, his tail wagging. But his eyes kept glancing toward the trees. It was the same path Emily had run through a dozen times during their games. Back inside, Emily had already fallen asleep with her hand resting on Ranger's neck. Her chest rose and fell slowly, peacefully. That night, a storm rolled far off in the distance. Just thunder for now. Nothing serious. The kind of storm no one worries about until it's too late. The next morning, Emily begged her parents to let her walk with the neighbor's older kids to the tree line. "Just to look at the icicles," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. Her mother hesitated. "I'll stay close. Promise." Ranger barked like he was agreeing with her. Her mother finally nodded. "But wear your red coat and don't wander off. And take Ranger." Emily hugged her tight and ran off, calling for Ranger to follow. He was by her side in an instant. That morning felt like any other. Just a girl and her dog, chasing winter magic. No one knew it would be the last time they saw her for nearly 2 days. Ranger had always understood the game. To an outsider, it might have looked like simple play, a girl hiding, a dog finding, but to Ranger, it was much more. Every game of hide and seek was a mission, a purpose, a bond that told him, "My girl needs me, and I will find her." It started when Emily was just 3. Still wobbling when she ran, still small enough to disappear behind a bucket or under a table. Her laughter used to echo through the farmhouse halls as she'd call out, "Come find me, Ranger." And he always did. Back then, her hiding spots were easy, behind the door, under the dining table, beneath a pile of laundry. Ranger would sniff, tilt his head, and paw gently at her hiding place. She'd squeal with delight every single time. Her parents laughed and called him the furry detective. But as Emily grew older, the game became more serious. She got better at hiding. And Ranger, well, he got better at finding. He learned her scent like the back of his paw. He knew what her coat smelled like after a walk, how her hands smelled after holding an apple, even the scent of her favorite stuffed rabbit she sometimes carried around. Emily loved watching Ranger's process. He'd pause at the starting point, sniff the air, then slowly move, nose low, tail wagging in anticipation. She'd hide behind hay bales, inside closets, even once in the doghouse. But no matter what, Ranger always found her. One rainy afternoon, Emily's dad captured it on video. She had tucked herself beneath the staircase in the barn, curled into a ball and giggling quietly. Ranger entered, paused, sniffed once, then walked straight to the hidden panel and barked twice. The video ended with Emily's burst of laughter and her voice saying, "You'll always find me, won't you?" The video had been watched 100 times. But now, that voice echoed painfully in her parents' minds. 2 days before the storm, Emily's mom had begun packing away some old toys. Ranger sat by the boxes, watching curiously. "This one's for donation," she said, holding up the stuffed rabbit. "She doesn't play with it anymore." Just as she was about to put it in the bag, Ranger gently took it in his mouth and walked it to Emily's bed. "She's not done with that one," her dad said quietly, watching Ranger tuck it beside her pillow. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, Emily had drawn a picture with crayons, herself and Ranger standing under a snowy tree. She handed it proudly to her dad. "Look," she said. "It's us. You know, if I ever really got lost, I bet Ranger would sniff me out faster than any human." Her mom smiled gently. "Let's hope you never have to test that, sweetie." Emily just grinned and buried her face in Ranger's fur. She was right. They would have to test it, and it would be far more than a game. The morning of the walk, the wind had a strange stillness to it. Emily wore her thick red coat, the hood slightly too big for her, and her gloves that made her fingers clumsy. Ranger walked proudly beside her, his head held high, ears alert. The neighbors' kids were older, 2 girls aged 11 and 13. They were supposed to stay on the trail by the frozen creek and be back within an hour. But the forest had its own plans. By the time the snow started falling harder, Visibility was already down. The older girls panicked. They called out to Emily, who had wandered slightly off the trail to look at something shiny on a tree branch. She didn't respond. They searched for her for 15 minutes, maybe more, but they were scared, cold, and unsure what to do. They ran back home to alert the parents. By then, Emily had vanished. Ranger's fur was already dusted with snow as he ran circles at the edge of the trees. He barked and barked, desperate for someone to follow him in. But the girls were crying. The parents were shouting. No one listened to the dog. That night, rescue teams arrived. Flashlights swept the woods. Helicopters circled. The forest echoed with her name, Emily. Emily. Over and over, until it became a haunting chorus in the cold. But still, nothing. Ranger kept trying to pull away. Every time someone held his collar, he'd tug toward the deeper woods. He knew where she had gone. Not exactly, but he felt her scent, like a faint trail painted in the snow. The parents barely slept. At one point, Ranger stood outside the cabin door and howled for hours, staring into the night, tail still. Emily's mom watched through the window, tears falling. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows where she is." But the snow was too deep. The search had to pause overnight. "Too dangerous," the rescue team said. Emily's dad clenched his fists. "My daughter's out there." "I understand, sir," one of the responders replied. "But so are 20-foot snowdrifts and sub-zero winds." That night, the family was forced to wait. But Ranger didn't wait. When everyone else had fallen asleep, including the exhausted volunteers, huddled in sleeping bags and gear, Ranger nudged open the door with his nose and slipped into the darkness. He didn't need gear, or maps, or flashlights. All he needed was her scent, and the memory of a promise, whispered by a little girl in a barn on a warm afternoon. "If I ever really get lost, you'll find me, right?" He would. He had to. The storm that day wasn't the one they had expected. It came faster than anyone could have predicted. A sudden gust of wind, followed by heavy snowflakes swirling in the air, thick enough to block out even the sun. The trees groaned under the weight of the snow, their branches bending and creaking in protest. Emily had wandered too far ahead. It was never her intention. She had simply wanted to see the glittering icicles hanging from the old oak tree, the ones her dad always said were magic. But in the thickening storm, she had become disoriented, unaware that the path she was following had started to disappear beneath the snow. Ranger had tried to follow, but his steps became slow and labored in the thickening drifts. He whined softly, his breath puffing in white clouds. His instincts screamed to protect her, to bring her back to safety, but Emily was already too far ahead. He barked twice, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the wind. Emily's fingers numbed as she pulled her gloves tighter around her hands. The cold began creeping into her bones. The wind bit at her face, and soon, she couldn't tell if it was snow or tears in her eyes. "Ranger," she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the freezing air. "Where are you?" But the dog was too far behind. By the time the older girls, Sarah and Mia, realized Emily had strayed too far, the snowstorm had already overtaken them. They couldn't see more than a few feet in front of them. Panic set in, and the world seemed to shrink into a single terrifying reality. Emily was lost. "We need to go back. Now." Mia shouted over the roaring wind, but Sarah, the eldest, pulled her back toward the path. "We can't leave her here. We need help." Ranger's ears perked up when he heard their voices. But instead of running toward them, he turned and bolted through the snow, straight into the woods. His nose was working overtime, his mind filled with only one thought: find her. The forest that had once been a familiar, comforting place now felt like a maze. The snow piled higher, and the wind whipped around Ranger's face, making his eyes water. But he pushed forward, nose to the ground, following the trail that only he could smell. The scent of Emily was faint, a thread of something familiar mixed with the cold, but he could still catch it. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Not after everything. Meanwhile, Emily, still unaware of the danger closing in around her, had stopped. The snow was coming down harder, and she could barely see through the swirling white. Her hands, stiff from the cold, were trembling as she tried to pull her hood back over her head. The wind howled as the trees above groaned under the weight of the snow. There was a hollow sound in the distance, and she couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else. Something that made her feel small and alone. Something that made her wish she had never strayed from the trail. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm, but the cold was getting unbearable. The snowflakes stuck to her lashes, and she squinted, trying to make out anything in the distance. But the world had become a white blur. "Ranger!" Her voice cracked. She called out again, louder this time, but only the sound of the wind answered. Her feet shuffled in the deepening snow. She had to keep moving. She didn't know why. Maybe because if she stopped, she felt like she might freeze, or maybe because the fear of being lost was creeping up on her. She pulled her coat tighter around her, but her fingers had become numb, her body too cold to feel anything. The forest had swallowed her whole, and she was lost in it. Back at the house, the search party was preparing. Rescue teams were organizing their equipment, but the wind and snow were still too severe for the helicopters to lift off. The radio crackled as the leaders of the search explained their plan. "We'll go in on foot. We've got to cover every inch of this forest." The parents were beside themselves, stricken with worry. Emily's mother had been pacing back and forth by the door, her eyes swollen from crying. "Where is she? Where is my baby?" she muttered, wringing her hands. Her father stood next to her, clutching the phone in his hand, making frantic calls. But no one had news. No one knew where she was. And Ranger? He was somewhere out there, running through the woods, relentlessly searching. But even he couldn't see the path anymore. The forest was turning into a labyrinth of white, and he could only follow the scent, a faint trace in the freezing air. The first few hours of the search were filled with a sense of calm urgency. Teams fanned out across the forest, calling Emily's name, combing the area in widening circles. The snow continued to fall, thicker now. The helicopters were grounded, and the walkie-talkies crackled with static. No sign of the girl. And no sign of Ranger, either. The hours turned into a blur. Emily's parents didn't sleep. They couldn't. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then, as nightfall approached, the rescuers pulled back. The storm had intensified, and the temperature was plummeting rapidly. No one could stay out much longer. "It's too dangerous," they said. "We have to regroup in the morning." But for Ranger, the night was just beginning. As the lights of the search team grew dimmer and the sound of human voices faded into the distance, Ranger found a narrow path, one that had been hidden beneath the falling snow. His nose twitched. He knew it. This was the place. He sprinted ahead, his paws slipping as he bounded through the deep snow. His heart raced as his senses sharpened. He was getting closer. And then, through the darkening night and the deepening snow, he heard it, a faint whimper. A small voice, barely audible beneath the wind, came from the hollow of an old, gnarled tree. "Emily." Ranger's tail went stiff with recognition. Without hesitation he barked. Twice. His paws scraped against the snow as he dug at the base of the tree. The air was thick with tension as night fully descended on the forest. Emily's parents had not left the search command center. They were pacing in desperate circles, clutching their phones, trying to reach anyone who could provide new information. It was like the world had gone silent except for the howling wind, which seemed to echo the emptiness they were feeling. They hadn't given up, not completely, but the darkness that swallowed the forest outside, along with the impossibly heavy snow, made it hard to maintain hope. The rescue team had pulled back earlier, saying they would reconvene in the morning. But as far as Emily's parents were concerned, every minute spent waiting was a minute too long. "We need to go back," Emily's mother whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes, red from hours of crying, pleaded with her husband. "We can't wait until morning. We need to find her now. I can't lose her." Her husband's face was pale. He clenched his jaw tightly. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make this nightmare end, but he didn't have the words. Ranger had been the first to notice. Even when the search party turned back, even when it seemed hopeless, he hadn't given up. He never would. The searchlights were turned off, and the vehicles rumbled as they slowly made their way back to base. The helicopter had been grounded earlier that afternoon, and the cold that followed was brutal. Emily's father, worn out and numb, couldn't stand still any longer. He had to do something. He had to look. Meanwhile, in the snow-choked forest, Ranger was still running. His paws left deep imprints in the thick, wet snow, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. He could smell her. Her scent was still faint, but it was there, like a whisper in the blizzard. He had no time to stop. No time to think about his own exhaustion or the painful chill that was now creeping through his fur. He had one goal in mind: find Emily. It wasn't just the job of a rescue dog anymore. This was personal. She was his best friend. The one who had always looked into his eyes with laughter and joy, who had fed him treats and played endless games of fetch. Ranger had never thought about it before, but he was so much more than a farm dog. He was her protector. And he would not stop until she was safe. But the deeper he went into the woods, the colder it became. The snow was thick now, and the trees towered above him like silent giants, their bare branches heavy with snow. Ranger barked as he sprinted, his voice swallowed by the endless gusts of wind. He paused for a moment to sniff the air. His fur stood on end as his ears flicked toward a faint, distant sound. A whimper. Emily. He picked up speed again, dodging fallen branches and thick drifts of snow. The forest felt endless, but his nose led him straight to the heart of it. Somewhere ahead, through the maze of trees and the swirling storm, Emily was waiting. Back at the search command center, the atmosphere was tense. The rescue teams were huddling together for warmth, but no one had any new leads. They were cold, exhausted, and anxious. Every passing minute seemed like a small eternity. "Where is she? Where is she?" Emily's mother repeated over and over again, wringing her hands as she sat by the radio. She stared at the cold metal door of the center as if waiting for someone to burst in with good news, some sign that they hadn't failed her daughter. Her father stood by the window, staring out into the night. His eyes searched the blackness, as if hoping that somehow, by sheer will, he could make the night sky reveal where Emily was. But it was the same silence, the same howling wind, the same darkness. In the woods, Ranger had reached the place where the scent was strongest. The scent that had led him here. The wind had howled with a fierce intensity, carrying the scent of danger. But there, buried beneath a snow-laden tree, he had found it. The faintest trace of Emily. She was nearby. He barked again, his voice hoarse, frantic. It wasn't enough to break through the storm. But the dog's determination hadn't wavered. Back at the house, Emily's mother collapsed into a chair, her face pale and drawn with worry. Emily's father had disappeared into the woods earlier, but no one knew where to look next. The cold was unbearable. The forest was vast, and every step seemed to bring them further from where they needed to be. Then, just as the last searchlights were about to dim, something unusual happened. Ranger appeared from the darkness. His fur was coated in snow, his eyes wild with exhaustion, but there was something urgent in the way he moved. The team's leader, standing by the door, spotted him first. "What is it, boy? What have you found?" Ranger stood at the edge of the snow, his nose to the ground, sniffing again, his body tense with the energy of the hunt. He barked once more, this time louder. The team leader exchanged a quick look with his crew. Without hesitation, he gestured to the others to follow Ranger's lead. The dog's persistence was telling them something. Something important. "We're not done yet. Follow him." The rescuers took off toward Ranger, who darted ahead, his fur blending with the snow as he led them deeper into the forest. The team followed, moving swiftly as the wind howled and the storm raged around them. Ranger's sense of smell was pulling him toward something. He wasn't giving up. And neither were the rescue workers now at his side. Each step they took was filled with the echo of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were getting closer. The snow continued to fall in thick, heavy sheets, but Ranger's path was clear. He was moving with a purpose now, a determination that was impossible to ignore. His paws sank deeper into the snow with every step, but he didn't slow down. There was no time for hesitation. As the team pushed forward, they found themselves at the base of a massive oak tree, its hollow trunk partially covered with snow. Ranger stopped, standing still for a moment before he barked again, louder, his eyes locked onto the tree. One of the rescuers, realizing what the dog was doing, rushed forward, dropping to his knees in the snow. And then, out of the corner of his eye, the rescuers spotted something. A small figure, curled up tightly in the hollow of the tree. Emily. The snow seemed to blur everything around them as the rescue team gathered around the hollow tree. Ranger stood beside them, panting heavily, his fur caked with snow, but his eyes never left the spot where Emily lay. The rescuers were moving quickly now, their hands shaking as they carefully cleared the snow from around the small, curled-up form. One of them, a man in his 40s with a gruff voice, gently pulled back a branch that was covering Emily's face. His breath caught in his throat when he saw the faintest rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. Emily's body was cold, too cold. Her lips were pale, her skin nearly as white as the snow around them, but she was breathing. The rescuers had barely begun to remove the snow when Ranger gave another low, insistent bark, his ears perked. His nose twitched as he stood still, watching them. He refused to leave. The leader of the rescue team, a woman in her late 30s, nodded. "Good boy, Ranger. We've got her." But Ranger didn't move. He didn't look satisfied, not yet. He paced back and forth, watching them pull Emily from the hollow tree, his concern palpable. As the rescuers gently lifted the unconscious girl into a stretcher, Ranger remained close, his nose nudging her hand. He licked it gently as though urging her to wake up, his sharp eyes scanning her face for any sign of movement. His loyalty and concern never wavered. "Let's get her back," the team leader said, her voice now full of urgency. "We need to get her to the medic before she gets worse." But even as they carried Emily toward the extraction point, Ranger remained by her side. He never strayed too far. He stayed close to the team, glancing back at her, making sure that she was still with them, still breathing. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and as they trudged through the snow, every step felt like a battle against time. Meanwhile, at the search base, Emily's parents had been clinging to what little hope they had left. They had heard nothing since the last transmission and felt the cruel sting of helplessness. Each passing minute felt like an eternity as they stared into the darkened night, praying for any sign that their daughter would be found. Emily's father, his face pale and worn, stood by the window of the search command center. He couldn't stand the stillness. He needed to see something, anything, that would tell him they were close. His hands were clenched into fists, his nails biting into his palms. "Do you think?" Emily's mother whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Do you think they've found her?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. It felt like a question without an answer. His throat was too tight to speak. But just as the last shred of hope seemed to fade, the door to the command center swung open, and a voice echoed through the air. "We found her. She's alive." The words hit like a shockwave. Emily's mother gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Emily's father turned quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. Could it be true? One of the rescuers appeared at the door, his face covered in snow, his breath visible in the cold air. But his eyes were bright with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We found her. It's Ranger." He led us straight to her. The parents rushed forward, both of them unable to hold back their tears. They had imagined this moment, dreamed of it. But now that it was real, it felt almost too surreal to grasp. Emily's mother reached out, her hands trembling as she gripped the rescuer's arm. Is she okay? Where is she? Please, tell me she's okay." The rescuer gave a gentle nod. "She's alive. Barely. She's in shock, but she's breathing. We're getting her back to the base now." Ranger had found her. The dog, the loyal companion who had never given up. He had found his way through the storm, through the bitter cold, and he had led them to Emily. In the woods, the snow continued to fall relentlessly. But the path was clearer now. With Emily in safe hands, the rescue team moved quickly, rushing her toward the base camp, where medical personnel waited. Ranger trotted along beside them, keeping close. His ears were alert, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger, even though the immediate threat was over. But he knew something the humans didn't. This wasn't over until Emily was back with her family, safe and warm. As they finally reached the clearing where the helicopter waited, Ranger's paws were caked with snow, his body trembling from the cold. But he didn't stop. He didn't slow down. One of the rescuers opened the helicopter door, and the team carefully loaded Emily onto the stretcher, placing her gently inside. "Take care of her," the rescuer said to the medic inside. "She's a fighter, but she's going to need all the help she can get." The helicopter's engines began to hum, preparing to lift off, but Ranger didn't follow. Instead, he stood at the edge of the clearing, staring after the helicopter, his body tense. His work wasn't done yet. Back at the base, Emily's parents were holding onto each other as they waited. The wind howled through the trees, but inside, it was warm. The fire crackled in the hearth, and their hearts slowly started to beat again. They had no words to describe the flood of emotions that overwhelmed them. Their daughter was coming home. But there was one thing they hadn't expected. When the helicopter landed, Ranger was there, waiting by the door. His eyes, tired but still sharp, locked onto Emily's parents as they rushed forward. He wasn't just any dog. He was the dog that saved her. With one last, determined step, Ranger walked over to Emily's father, who bent down and wrapped his arms around the dog's strong neck. There were no words, just an unspoken understanding. "Thank you, Ranger," Emily's father whispered, tears streaming down his face. And as Ranger stood there, his body still shivering from the cold, he seemed to understand. He had done what he was born to do. He had never given up. The snowstorm had worsened. Thick, icy flakes filled the air, the night swallowing everything in its path. The rescuers had returned to base, their heads low, faces tired, eyes hollow. The air was thick with defeat. It had been 2 days since Emily went missing, and the exhaustion had seeped into every bone of every volunteer, every officer, every team member. The situation was bleak. Inside the search command center, the lights were dimmed, and the buzzing of radios filled the air. No new leads. No new clues. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second like a hammer to their hearts. Time was running out. Emily's parents had been sitting there for hours, not saying much. Her mother clutched her scarf, the warmth of it offering little comfort against the cold ache inside her chest. Emily's father had his head in his hands, unable to shake the feeling of helplessness. He had been the one to promise Emily he would always protect her. And now, he couldn't even keep her safe. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "Maybe it's time we call it off for the night," the rescue team leader, a middle-aged man named Mark, said quietly as he approached the parents. His voice was heavy with the weight of the decision. "We're losing visibility. The storm's too strong. We've covered every inch of this area. It might be best to give it one more try at first light." Emily's father's face remained stoic, but inside he was crumbling. He couldn't bear to hear those words. Calling it off meant giving up, and the thought of doing that, it was unbearable. "No," Emily's mother whispered, barely audible. "We can't stop now. She's out there. I know she is. Please, please don't stop. We have to keep looking." Mark took a deep breath, glancing back at the rescue team. The decision had to be made. The storm was fierce, the night growing colder with each passing minute. The trackers were exhausted. But Emily's mother's desperation pulled at him, and his own resolve began to waver. He turned to one of the men who had been checking the radio. "Can we get one more search party out there? Just one more sweep before we call it." The radio operator nodded reluctantly. "We'll lose precious time, but we can try. We don't have much left to work with." "Then do it," Mark said firmly. The radio operator quickly passed the message to the team outside. As the snow began to pile higher outside the shelter, the last group of volunteers bundled up, strapping on their gear, preparing for one final search in the storm. But in the dark woods, there was one who would never give up. Ranger. Even as the team returned to base, Ranger was still there in the woods, his legs aching from the constant motion, his fur weighed down with snow. But he wasn't tired. His instincts drove him forward, led him deeper into the storm. "You feel it? Feel her?" His nose twitched. Emily was out there. As the search parties prepared to rest, Ranger was already on the move again. He ignored the cold seeping into his bones, the fatigue that made his legs tremble. His mind was focused only on one thing: finding Emily. He had never stopped believing in her. He knew the storm was fierce, but he could sense it, her scent, still faint but there, lingering on the wind. He had trained his entire life to seek, to search, to find the lost. He wasn't a professional rescue dog, but in that moment, he was more than that. He was her protector. And he would find her. As the night deepened, the storm grew more intense. The helicopters had been grounded. The searchlights had gone dim. The rescuers were forced to retreat, their spirits crushed by the storm's relentless fury. They had no choice but to call it a night, despite the growing feeling in their hearts that Emily might still be out there, waiting for them. But then, in the distance, a distant bark echoed through the trees. It was faint at first, like a whisper, then louder, clearer, more insistent. Ranger. The rescue team, returning to base, froze. They stopped dead in their tracks, their hearts skipping a beat. For a moment, they thought it was the wind playing tricks on them. But no, there it was again, a bark carried through the storm. Mark's heart raced. He exchanged a quick glance with one of his men, and they didn't hesitate. "That's Ranger," Mark said, his voice low but determined. "He's still out there." The team leader shouted orders, pulling together a handful of volunteers who hadn't yet left. They quickly suited up again, heading back into the snowstorm, their determination reignited by the sound of the dog's bark. Ranger had found something. Or someone. Through the snow-heavy forest, Ranger's paws pounded against the frozen earth as he followed the faint scent trail. His eyes were narrowed against the swirling snow, his ears laid back, focused entirely on the task at hand. He could sense her now, feel the faint traces of her scent growing stronger the further he pushed into the woods. The hollow tree. He remembered it. She had been there. He had found her once, and he would find her again. But this time, it wasn't just Emily's scent leading him, it was his instincts. The warmth of her body, the steady rhythm of her heart, the soft sound of her breath, it all tugged at him, guiding him through the night. And then, as he reached a dense thicket of trees, Ranger's body froze. Through the branches, the faint outline of someone, curled into the snow. Ranger's heart surged as he darted forward, his bark echoing through the trees. There she was. Emily. The night swallowed the forest whole. The searchlights had been shut off hours ago, and the helicopters were grounded. The last remnants of the rescue team were making their way back to base, each person lost in their own thoughts, tired, disheartened, and crushed by the weight of uncertainty. But one heart remained full of hope. Ranger. Alone in the storm, with only the sound of his paws crunching against the snow, Ranger refused to give up. He had heard the voices, felt the cold despair of the team pulling away. But he had made a promise to Emily, a promise that was worth more than exhaustion, more than the biting cold that froze his fur stiff. He would find her. He would never stop. Ranger's nose was sharp, every inch of his being honed in on the scent trail he had found, the faintest traces of Emily's presence in the cold air. It was like a whisper on the wind, but to Ranger, it was clear, undeniable. He could feel it deep within his chest, a magnetic pull to continue, even when everyone else had given up. The darkness of the woods seemed to close in around him as he navigated deeper into the storm. The snow, now thick and swirling, blurred his vision, but it couldn't stop him. His body moved with purpose, his instincts driving him forward. It wasn't the wind, the cold, or the fatigue that slowed him. It was the thought of Emily, lost, alone, and waiting for someone to find her. Ranger would be that someone. The trees were heavy with snow, their branches creaking in the wind. Ranger dodged and weaved, following the faint scent of his human sister. It wasn't easy. His paws were sore, his body aching, his muscles begging for rest. But there was no time for rest. Emily needed him. He passed through the frozen landscape like a shadow, the only sound his deep, rhythmic breathing, the occasional growl or bark breaking the eerie silence of the night. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed on, further from the safety of the base, his determination growing stronger with each step. The wind howled louder, the snow biting at his fur. He had lost track of time. It felt like hours, maybe even days, since he had left the warmth of the rescue camp. But Ranger had no sense of time now. Only the need to find Emily. And then, as he rounded a bend in the forest, he saw it. A hollow tree, its trunk wide and cracked, snow settled in its base. Ranger's ears perked up, and for a moment, everything stopped. His heart seemed to skip a beat. This was it. The hollow tree. Emily had always loved playing in the woods, and there was one spot she had always found safe, a place where she would go when she felt scared, when she needed to hide. It was a place Ranger knew well. She'd run to it during their games of hide and seek, trusting him to find her, to keep her safe. And now, as he stood before the hollow tree, he knew deep down that she was there. He could sense it, the warmth of her presence, the sound of her shallow breath buried deep within the tree's protective shell. His instincts screamed at him to act quickly. With a single powerful bark, Ranger sprang toward the hollow tree. His paws slid through the snow, his body thrusting forward, digging at the base of the tree. His nose brushed against the cold bark, and then, he heard it. A faint sound, a soft, terrified whimper. Ranger's heart leapt in his chest. She was there. With frantic energy, Ranger began to scratch at the tree, his paws working furiously to uncover what was hidden. The snow had piled high around the tree, but he could sense the warmth beneath it. The faint whimper turned into a small cough, and then Emily's voice, a soft, broken sound, whispered into the wind. "Ranger?" Her voice was like a lifeline to him. She was alive. Ranger barked again, more urgently this time, the joy of finding her bubbling up inside him. He scratched harder at the tree, and as the snow shifted, Emily's face slowly became visible. Her eyes fluttered open, the cold biting into her delicate skin. She was pale, her lips tinged blue, but she was breathing. She was alive. Ranger leaned forward, nudging her gently with his nose, and as if on instinct, Emily reached out, her cold hand grasping his fur. She wasn't strong enough to stand, but she managed to pull herself closer to him, clinging to his warmth as though it was the only thing keeping her alive. "Ranger," she whispered, her voice hoarse, weak. "You found me." Ranger let out a soft whine, his body trembling with relief. He leaned down, curling his body around hers, instinctively sheltering her from the wind. The storm continued to howl above them, but here, in the hollow tree, there was warmth, the warmth of love and loyalty, of the bond between a dog and his human. But time was running out. Emily was too weak to move. Ranger could hear her faint breaths, each one labored, each one struggling against the cold. The rescue teams were far behind, and the storm was only getting worse. Ranger needed to act fast. With a final glance back into the storm, Ranger let out a loud, determined bark, his voice cutting through the night. Help was coming. He had found her. He wasn't going to stop until she was safe. Ranger stayed by Emily's side, his body pressed tightly against hers, keeping her warm with the heat of his fur. As he sat there, he kept looking up at the trees, waiting, hoping. The sound of the storm was deafening, the winds a constant force against him, but he didn't care. All that mattered was Emily. And he knew, deep down, that help was on its way. The storm howled like a living thing, furious and untamed, as Ranger sat still beside Emily, guarding her with every ounce of his strength. He could feel her body trembling beneath him, the cold gnawing at her fragile form, and yet he refused to leave her side. His tail twitched occasionally, a sign of his alertness, but mostly he remained close, his body acting as a shield against the unrelenting winter. The night had fallen deeper, the shadows creeping in, and Ranger could feel the biting wind seeping through his thick fur. His muscles were sore from running through the snow, and fatigue was starting to weigh heavily on him. Yet he held firm. Emily was alive, but just barely. Every breath she took was shallow, every movement slow, like a ghost of the spirited girl he knew. But Ranger wasn't about to let her slip away, not when he had fought so hard to find her. Her tiny hands clung to his fur, desperate for warmth, for any sign that she wasn't alone. Ranger leaned down, licking her cold cheek, hoping his touch would bring some comfort. His heart ached as he saw her shiver against the storm, her eyes barely open, but the flicker of recognition when she looked at him gave him the strength to press on. "Ranger!" Emily whispered again, her voice barely audible against the storm. "You found me. I knew you'd come." The words, weak as they were, filled him with an unshakable resolve. He couldn't stop now. She was so close to safety, but the storm was relentless, and he couldn't carry her on his own. His only hope was the search team, the very people who had given up hours ago, who thought it was too late. But Ranger wasn't one to accept defeat. He knew they were out there. They had to be. He couldn't leave Emily alone in this cold, isolated world. With a soft growl, Ranger raised his head and listened. The howling wind filled his ears, but somewhere beneath it, there was the faintest sound: footsteps, the crunch of snow, voices. The search team was close. Without hesitation, Ranger stood, his legs stiff and sore, but his spirit unbroken. He looked down at Emily one last time, making sure she was still breathing, still clinging to life. Her small form was barely visible in the growing darkness, but her presence, the warmth of her touch, told him everything he needed to know. She was still here, and he would never stop fighting for her. Ranger barked once, twice, his voice carrying across the wind, loud and clear. His powerful bark cut through the storm like a beacon, a signal to the world that they were not forgotten. He barked again, harder this time, with all the strength he had left. The sound of his barking echoed through the trees, a call that would reach the search team. They had to hear him. They had to know he had found her. Emily's head lolled slightly as she heard his bark, a faint smile crossing her face. "Ranger," she whispered, her voice hoarse with the effort. But it was enough to make Ranger's heart swell with hope. He wasn't imagining it. She was still there, still with him. But the minutes felt like hours. Ranger paced back and forth, his paws slipping in the snow, his body shaking with the cold and the adrenaline coursing through him. His instincts screamed at him to keep barking, to keep calling until they came, but the storm was so thick, the night so deep. How could anyone hear him in all of this? Another bark. Another call, this time more desperate. Ranger's voice cracked with the strain, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when Emily was so close to safety. Then, through the storm, he heard something, a soft shout. A voice he recognized. It was faint at first, but it was there, a crackling echo on the wind. The search team was coming. They had heard him. Ranger's heart skipped a beat as he raced toward the sound. His paws left deep prints in the snow as he bounded through the forest, guided only by the hope that he was leading them to her. He barked once more, just to be sure they knew the direction, and then he stopped, turning to look back at the hollow tree where Emily lay. His eyes locked onto the shadowy shapes of the search team as they emerged from the storm, their figures slowly becoming clearer. Ranger whined, low and urgent, before turning back toward the tree. His body quivered with anticipation, his tail wagging frantically as the rescuers drew closer. They had to hurry. Time was running out. The team moved swiftly, their lights cutting through the darkness. A few of them called out, shouting for Ranger, for any sign of where Emily might be. Ranger answered, his bark loud and sure. He was right there by the tree, waiting for them. In no time at all, the rescuers were by his side. One of them crouched down beside Ranger, speaking softly as the dog turned to lead them back to the hollow tree. Their eyes searched the ground, and it didn't take long before they spotted Emily, barely visible in the snow, her frail form lying against the tree. "Over here," one of the rescuers shouted. "We found her." Ranger didn't need to hear the words to know. His tail wagged, and he barked in triumph as the team quickly reached Emily. They lifted her gently, their hands working quickly to wrap her in warm blankets, to shield her from the cold that had gripped her tiny body. Ranger stayed close, watching them, never leaving Emily's side. As the team began to move toward the safety of the camp, Ranger trotted beside them, his nose close to Emily, never straying too far. He kept looking up at her, watching for any signs of weakness, any indication that she was fading. He would not let her slip away. Finally, the light of the campfire flickered in the distance. The warmth, the people, the safety, it was all so close now. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ranger allowed himself to believe that everything would be okay. They had found her. And Ranger had never stopped fighting for her. The camp was a blur of activity as rescuers worked quickly to get Emily out of the freezing cold. The warmth of the campfire never seemed so inviting, so vital. The air, thick with steam from the blankets and warm drinks, surrounded the small group as they carefully moved Emily to a makeshift bed. Ranger, still alert, kept pacing around them, his eyes fixed on the girl he had fought so hard to protect. His mind was a whirlwind of concern, but his body, weary and battered, was struggling to keep up. Emily's lips were blue, her tiny fingers curled into fists as if holding on to some faint, distant memory of safety. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, and she looked at the people around her with confusion. They were familiar, but everything seemed blurry. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Ranger," she mumbled, her breath shallow, but her eyes still filled with that trust, that bond only she and the dog could share. Ranger's ears perked up at the sound of her name. He immediately bounded toward her, his tail wagging slightly. His body felt like it was ready to collapse from exhaustion, but the sight of her, her fragile form wrapped in blankets, her face pale and drawn, gave him the strength to stay by her side. "He's here, Emily," one of the rescuers said gently, pointing to the dog as he sat down beside her, his large body still trembling from the cold. Ranger leaned against her, nudging her hand with his nose, silently asking her to pet him, to feel the reassurance of his presence. Emily's hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers barely able to grip his fur. But she managed to stroke his back, the action small but significant. She smiled weakly, her face lighting up for the briefest moment as she whispered, "You found me, Ranger. I knew you would." Tears welled up in the eyes of the rescuers as they watched the scene unfold. It was a miracle that no one had expected. This girl, who had been lost for so long, was alive, and it was only thanks to this brave dog who never gave up. No one had thought it possible, but Ranger's loyalty, his instinct, and his determination had brought them to this moment. As Emily continued to rest, the medical team moved in, working on her quickly, checking her vitals and administering warmth. One of the paramedics gently placed an oxygen mask over her face to help her breathe easier. But even amidst the hustle of the rescue, Emily's gaze remained fixed on Ranger. He was her anchor, the one thing she could rely on in a world that had gone cold and dark. Ranger, however, wasn't the one to rest. As Emily's condition stabilized, he stood up, swaying slightly on his paws, and walked to the edge of the camp. His body was battered, his fur matted with snow, and his eyes heavy with exhaustion. But he couldn't rest, not yet. The storm had passed, but the weight of his journey, the toll it had taken on him, was beginning to set in. His legs, stiff and sore from hours of running, felt like they were made of stone. His body ached from the relentless sprint through snow and ice, from the cold that had gnawed at his bones. And yet, Ranger refused to give in. He knew he had to stay strong. For Emily, for the girl he had saved. One of the rescuers, a tall man with a kind face, noticed the dog's distress. He approached quietly, crouching down to Ranger's level. The man offered a gentle hand, but Ranger took a few steps back, not out of fear, but because his focus was entirely on Emily. He couldn't let his guard down just yet. He had done everything to bring her to safety, and now he had to be sure she was going to be okay. But the rescuers weren't blind to the dog's condition. They noticed how he was trembling, how his body seemed to be shutting down now that the immediate danger had passed. They called to the medical team, and they moved to attend to him too. Ranger's breathing became shallow, his legs buckling slightly as he tried to walk toward Emily once more. His body was giving out, but his mind was still sharp. He collapsed at her feet, his head resting on her legs, as though he couldn't bear to be apart from her even for a moment. "He's exhausted," the paramedic said softly, looking at the dog. "But he's a hero too." One of the rescuers knelt beside Ranger, gently running his hands through the dog's matted fur, giving him a few moments of peace. Ranger's eyes fluttered closed, and he let out a long sigh, the tension in his body slowly beginning to ease. The warmth of the campfire, the sound of Emily's breathing, and the presence of the kind strangers who had helped, all of it helped him finally relax. His mission was complete. "Ranger," Emily whispered again, her voice barely audible but filled with gratitude. "You saved me." Ranger lifted his head for a moment, looking at Emily, his eyes tired but still filled with devotion. He didn't need words to understand her. The bond they shared was stronger than anything that could be spoken aloud. The rescue team gathered around, making sure both Emily and Ranger were settled and comfortable. As Emily rested, a soft smile on her lips, and the warmth of the camp embraced them both, the storm outside seemed like a distant memory. They had made it. Emily was alive, and Ranger had done the impossible. The journey wasn't over yet. They still had to make it back to town, to the doctors and the family who had been waiting, praying for this moment. But for now, in this small, quiet camp, with the snow falling gently outside, Ranger and Emily were safe. And for the first time in days, they could both finally rest. The days following the rescue were a blur of recovery, warmth, and love. Emily's body was weak, but her spirit was unbroken. The doctors had done their work, and though she was still fragile, her strength was returning. The first thing she had asked for when she woke up was Ranger. She couldn't bear to be apart from him for long. The family home, once filled with worry and uncertainty, now echoed with laughter and light. Emily's parents hovered over her with care, making sure she had everything she needed. But it was Ranger who never left her side. Whether it was sitting beside her on the couch, gently resting his head on her lap, or curling up at the foot of her bed, Ranger was always there, a constant reminder of the loyalty that had brought her back. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Emily and her dog grew even stronger. The family, though forever changed by the ordeal, found solace in the miracle that had unfolded. They had learned the true meaning of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable connection between a child and her dog. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow over the house, Emily's parents decided it was time to do something special. They had a framed photo made, a picture of Ranger and Emily together. It wasn't a professional photo, it wasn't staged. It was a candid moment captured during their first reunion after the rescue. Emily's face, pale but bright with joy, her arms wrapped tightly around Ranger, who had a look of contentment in his eyes that only a hero could have. The frame was placed on the wall in the living room, next to a simple plaque that read, "Ranger, the one who never gave up." The family stood back, admiring the photo in silence. There was no need for words. The picture spoke volumes. It was a testament to the dog's unwavering spirit, his loyalty, and his extraordinary ability to find his way through the darkest of times. Emily smiled softly as she looked up at the photo. Her hand reached down to stroke Ranger's fur, who was lying peacefully at her feet. "You did it, didn't you, Ranger?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You never gave up on me. You're my hero." Ranger's tail thumped lightly against the floor in response. He looked up at her, his eyes soft but proud. He didn't need a plaque or a photo to know what he had done. He had always known. He had done it for her, out of love, out of loyalty, and out of the bond they shared. That was enough. The family gathered around, taking a moment to honor Ranger's heroism in their own way. As the photo was admired by every visitor, every friend, every relative, they spoke of the dog who had never stopped sniffing, the dog who had given everything to bring a little girl home. Ranger's story was one that would never be forgotten. And though he was just a dog, to Emily and her family he was so much more. He was family, a protector, and a symbol of hope, love, and the relentless strength of the bond between a girl and her dog. The storm had passed. The darkness had lifted. And now, all that remained was a story of survival, resilience, and an undying devotion. And as Ranger lay beside Emily, his eyes slowly closing as he rested at last, he knew that, for him, the journey had been worth it. Because, after all, he had brought her home. If you believe in the power of loyalty, love, and the bond between a dog and its human, hit that like button and share this incredible story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us of the true meaning of courage. And if you have a special bond with a pet, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story and how your pet has impacted your life. Keep the love alive.